Some stories never make the headlines, some victims remain nameless, and some mysteries fade before they're ever solved. If you're drawn to the strange and unexplained, from cryptids and aliens to hauntings, true crime, and everything in between, you need to check out Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen. Hosted by Frank and Sage, this podcast dives into a plethora of unexplained phenomena. They research, discuss, and share their own opinions on stories that linger in the shadows, from the unsolved to the unbelievable. Listen to Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen wherever you get your podcasts, because every story, no matter how strange, deserves to be told.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. Picture this. It's late in the day along the Maritimes, and the sun is dropping fast. The water has that dull metallic look it gets when the sun is almost gone and the sky is turning a deep purple that usually means the weather is about to change. A few fishermen along the Northumberland shore are packing up for the evening when something bright catches their attention out in the water. It isn't lightning, it isn't a lighthouse. It's shaped like a tail schooner, and it's lit up from end to end. The sails look white, almost too white for that time of day, and the whole ship is covered in flames that don't seem to touch the sails at all. The mast shines like someone ran a torch straight up them. There's no smoke drifting off of it, no cackling, no burning smell rolling in the wind. Just this ship, fully on fire, moving across the water at a speed that doesn't match the calm surface. It keeps going until it reaches a patch of mist further out. The glow fades inside of it, and then the ship is gone. No wreck, no debris, nothing left to point to what anyone just saw. Welcome to the Flaming Ghost Ships of Canada. If you're anywhere along the Northumberland Strait between September into November, there's a chance that you might catch something moving across the water. People in Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick have been talking about it for more than 2 centuries. Every so often, someone spots a ship out in the strait that catches fire and then vanishes. The description stays surprisingly consistent. It's described as an older vessel with 3 or 4 masts. Some call it a square rigger, others say it looks more like a topsail schooner. The exact style depends on who you're talking to, but everyone agrees that it looks like something from another century. Then comes the part that gets most attention. The ship is burning. Sometimes it's only the rig, sometimes it's the entire upper deck that is lit. A few witnesses mention figures moving around on board, including people and dogs. The ship moves quickly, usually headed north or northeast. It doesn't drift and it doesn't slow down. It keeps a steady pace until it reaches a point where it just isn't visible anymore. That usually happens right around the time someone decides that they're going to try and reach it, offer help. Boats get launched and the ship is gone before anyone gets close. The sightings do happen throughout the year, but spring and fall bring about the most stories. A lot of people say that they see it at dusk or early in the morning before sunrise, especially when the weather is about to turn rough. Over time, the whole thing picked up a reputation as something you might see right before a storm. Okay, so the very first sighting on record goes all the way back to 1786 at Sea Cow Head Lighthouse. The keeper there watched a 3-mast schooner fighting its way through a northeast gale. The sails were full, the ship was driving straight towards the rocks, and there was nothing he could do but stand there and wait for the impact. Instead of hitting the cliffs, the ship moved into a wall of rain and disappeared. He never saw it come through the other side. More than a century later, around 1904, a group of sailors on the Northumberland Strait had their own encounter. Roy Grant's father was steering their schooner just after sundown when one of the men warned him about a ship crossing their bow. They watched it move across the water until it suddenly caught fire. They tried to follow it, but no matter how fast they sailed, the burning vessel stayed the same distance ahead of them. A man could be seen walking along the deck as the flames spread. The ship eventually sank lower and lower until only the mast was visible. The fire broke apart into 3 separate balls of light that moved across the waves before coming back together and forming the schooner again. The men followed it until dawn, and then it faded into the morning light. In the early 1900s, workers in Charlottetown Harbor saw a 3-mast ship burning from one end to the other. There were men running across the deck trying to put out the flames. A rescue boat was launched, but before it could reach the vessel, a heavy mist rolled in and the ship was gone. A full search turned up nothing. Sightings like this continued throughout the decades. On November 26, 1965, a woman in Cape John looked out her kitchen window and saw a ship on fire moving down the strait. She called her neighbors, and soon people along the Cape Road were watching the same scene. 2 nights later, it appeared again. Word spread to River John, and the cars lined the road as hundreds of people watched the burning ship move across the water before fading away. In the fall of 1973, Marvin McLeod was driving home from Murray Harbor just after midnight. The night was clear and cold, and he had binoculars in the car because it was hunting season. He saw a 3-mast schooner, and its sails were on fire and people were running across the deck. Some people were jumping over the side. He was about to call the Coast Guard when the ship just vanished. 5 years later, in October 1978, Wood Island's lightkeeper Leon Patton received a call from Bernice Smith, who lived nearby. She asked him what he was burning. When he looked out towards the strait, he saw a schooner fully ablaze headed towards Murray Harbor. It disappeared while he watched it. The sightings continued into the 1980s and 1990s. Larry Hooper of Murray River saw the ship twice. The first time was on a clear October night in the early 1980s while he was out on the bridge of Prince Nova. The sails were burning and people were moving around the deck. The ship vanished before they could get close. His second sighting happened years later while driving with his uncle. They saw the same burning vessel with sailors running across the deck. In January 1988, a burning ship was spotted from the Borden Ferry, but the radar showed nothing. Captain Angus Brown remembered taking the Prince Nova out one night to help what looked like a ship on fire. As they approached, though, the ship disappeared. That same night, a couple near Glengarry watched a full-rig ship move north at a speed that was far too fast for how calm the waters were. They watched it for more than an hour before it faded. There are roadside sightings as well. Near Cape John, drivers saw a vessel glowing on the horizon. One witness said that the entire outline of the ship was lit up. It stayed visible for 2 hours and was seen by dozens of people along the coastal road before vanishing entirely. Ronald Sherwood spent more than 40 years collecting accounts and saw the ship twice himself, once at Caribou and once near Wallace. Fortean researcher Gary S. Manjacopra gathered additional stories. That included the 1904 account from Roy Grant's father. But one of the most recent well-known sightings happened in January of 2028. The 17-year-old Matthew McGair was in Tatamagouche for a Katamavik program and had taken advantage of a free evening to work out at the Shapen Up Center on Main Street. He had stepped outside around 10 that night for some air and looked across the Tatamagouche Bay. At first, nothing about the view seemed unusual. He grew up near the St. Lawrence River in Sorel-Tracy, Quebec, and the late-night harbor traffic was familiar to him. Then he remembered the bay was frozen. Whatever he was looking at shouldn't have been there. He saw a bright white and gold ship that reminded him of the Blue Nose. It looked like a 3-mast schooner. He called to another participant inside of the gym to come look, but she stayed with her workout, leaving him alone with the sight. He watched the ship for several minutes before headed back inside. When he left the building again around 11, the ship was gone. With the ice covering the bay, he couldn't understand how something that size could simply vanish. At the time, he didn't know anything about the phantom ship legend until he mentioned what he saw to local historian Dale Swan, who was hosting him during the program. Swan explained the long history of sightings in the area. Giguère realized the description matched what he had seen. Swan said the young man's reaction made it clear that he had never heard the story before their conversation. Around the same time as Giguère's sighting, Tatamagouche Mountain resident Melville Langille saw something unusual while stargazing. He noticed a ball of flames above the horizon. At first, he thought it was light on the land, then realized it was actually over the water. He believed it was the same phenomenon that others had described. In an unusual turn of events in 2015, the Canadian Hydrographic Service was charting Pictou Harbor when their equipment picked up something unexpected at the bottom. It turned out to be a wooden ship, about 60 meters long, sitting upright in 12 to 15 meters of water. The divers who went down later found large wooden propellers, a massive rudder, and sections of an engine. Some of the exposed wood showed signs of charring. Local lobster fisherman Ben Anderson and diver Rob McKay took a group to the site in Anderson's boat, Just Splashy. As soon as the divers dropped into the water, they realized the wreck was a part of the harbor that rarely sees visitors. The visibility was poor, the water looked like a yellow fog, and the ship appeared suddenly out of it. The hull was covered in anemones and sea life. The wooden structure was worn away in places, but the iron fittings were still there. The stern rose several meters off the bottom. Inside the hull, the divers found pieces of piping that were likely part of an engine. The boilers, though, were missing. The anchors were buried in the silt, which raised questions about whether the ship had been anchored before it sank. The divers measured the wreck and they estimated that it was at least a century old. The amount of silt covering the structure suggested that it had been there for decades. Professional diver and marine archaeologist enthusiast Harvey Morash was surprised by how intact it was. Most wood ships in Nova Scotia's waters break apart quickly in storms, but this one was still upright. McKay believes that the fresh water in the harbor may have helped preserve it. He also pointed out the signs of fire on the wood. The group talked about the possibility that the ship may have burned while at anchor. They could not find a nameplate or any identifiable marks. Right now, the wreck remains unidentified.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast, you're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do.
Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit PayYourRent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
Along the New Brunswick coast, people have connected the burning ship legend to several real vessels. Some call it the John Craig Light, named after a shipwreck off Shippagan Island. Others say it's the Colburn, lost in an 1838 storm. Another theory points to the Isabella, which vanished in 1868 after leaving for South America. There are other stories that link the ghost ship to a pleasure craft or a pirate vessel set on fire during a fight below deck. Captain Kidd's name comes up in those versions. Another story describes a ship bound for Quebec that was struck by lightning and burned with everyone on board. The discovery in Pictou Harbor added a new layer to the conversation. A large wooden steamship with fire damage, sitting upright in shallow water close to the shore, and unknown to anyone until 2015. The divers could only see a few feet in front of them. The ship would appear suddenly out of murky water and then fade back into it. The size, the age, the charring, and the mystery around its identity have kept the questions going. The Northumberland Strait isn't the only stretch of water that has a story like this. Further up the coast, another ship has been reported for generations in the Chaleurs region. The Baie de Chaleurs has its own version of a burning ship. People in Bathurst, New Brunswick, and New Carlisle, Quebec, have seen the strange lights over the bay for generations. Sometimes it's described as a bright arc of light. Other times it looks like a full ship on fire, shaped like an old 3-mast gully that appears in New Brunswick's provincial flag. Sightings often happen before storms or on hot summer nights, and the glow is said to hang over the water long enough for people to gather along the shore and watch it. In the early 1900s, Harvard professor William F. Gannon traveled the region to investigate the reports. He didn't think much of ghost stories, but the number of people who claimed to have seen the burning ship caught his attention. He spoke with residents who described the same scene again and again. A vessel cut out of the bay, lit up from end to end, moving across the water with no sign of a living crew. Gannon believed that there was a natural cause behind it, but he admitted that the phenomenon was real enough for people to mistake it for a fire on a ship. Local stories go back much further. One of the oldest versions began more than 500 years ago with the Portuguese explorer Jasper Cortereal. According to the tale, he sailed into the region in the early 1500s, hoping to find a route to Asia. When he realized the land was not what he expected, he kidnapped dozens of indigenous people to sell as slaves in Portugal. The story says that when he returned for more captives, an indigenous force confronted him. A battle broke out on his flagship, the ship caught fire, and the crew jumped into the cold water. As the ship burned, the sailors swore that they would haunt the bay for 1,000 years. Another version places Cortereal near Huron Island. In that telling, he was killed by the Mamikik after attempting to take more captives. His brother arrived the following year to search for him, only to meet the same fate. Their ship caught fire, and the crew went into the water. The early settlers on Huron Island, including the Pettigrew family, claimed that the burning ship often appears on the north side of the island during full moons. One account from 1878 describes a woman on her veranda who saw a burned sailor approach her house and ask for help. When she turned to run, the figure brushed past her, and she realized he had no legs. Now, the historical records do confirm that Jasper Cortereal was real, and that he did kidnap 57 Indigenous people who were taken to Portugal and sold. What isn't clear is whether he reached the Baie de Chaleurs. Most evidence places him in Newfoundland, possibly Cape Breton. His fleet split up while exploring. His own ship was never seen again. Everything beyond that part is folklore that grew around the fire ship. Local folklore, of course, contributes additional cultural dimensions. One story from the Restigouche area tells of a group of pirates who murdered a woman. With her last breath, she cursed them, saying that they would burn on the bay for as long as the world existed. Hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn, am I right? Another tale describes a crew headed out in bad weather. They believed that one of their own had brought them misfortune, so they killed him. And when the ship caught fire, the story claimed that it was his blood taking revenge. Versions of that one appeared in several coastal communities, usually tied to older Catholic families who passed it down through generations. Another tale ties the fire ships to the Battle of Restigouche in 1760. The fighting between the French and the British forces left ships damaged and burning, and some people believe that the souls of those lost in the battle still move through the bay. There are also stories of a bride who was taken by a visiting crew. The ship that carried her away later burned, and the men aboard were said to be doomed to sail the bay forever. When Harvard professor William F. Gannon visited the region in 1905, he expected to find nothing more than exaggerated stories. Instead, he met people who insisted that they had seen the light themselves. Captain Turner of Riverside told him that he had watched it with his own eyes. A woman in Caraquet said that she thought one of her husband's schooners was burning until she realized the ship she was looking at wasn't real. James Harper of Muscoot describes seeing it on the ice in winter, rising and falling like a column of flame. Robert Wilson, who spent much of his life sailing the bay, said he passed it within 100 yards on a dark night. He described it as a glowing shape on the water, sometimes like a ship, sometimes not, and sometimes disappearing while he watched it. A keeper at Miscou Gully said that it looked more like a bonfire. Andrew Wilson said that it resembled a whaleboat. And then there are others, like Jas Bruno and Ed Verberd, who said that they've never seen anything at all. When Gannon left the region, he was frustrated. He had gathered dozens of accounts and still had no clear answer. When he returned to Harvard, he mentioned the problem to Dr. J. Orne Green, who surprised him by saying that he had once seen strange lights on the bay as well. The two men went through the reports again and noticed that many witnesses described light first and only described it was a ship after talking with neighbors. Gannon eventually concluded that the phenomenon was a natural electrical effect similar to St. Elmo's fire. Sailors have seen St. Elmo's fire on masts and rigs during storms, and it can create a bright, shifting column of light that moves in waves people might interpret as a burning vessel. Eyewitness accounts from both regions show the same range of descriptions. Some people see a full ship on fire. Others see a bright arc of light. Some describe a column rising and falling over the water, and a few say that it looks like a bonfire. Others say it resembles a boat without a mast. Some sailors have passed close enough to see it glow clearly. Others have lived their entire life on the water without seeing anything at all. The scientific explanations kind of overlap with what Gannon was saying. St. Elmo's fire is one of the most common theories. It creates a blue or violet glow around pointed objects when the air is heavily charged, usually during storms. Sailors have seen it on masts and rigs for centuries. It can form columns or shifting shapes that move in a way that some people might interpret as a burning vessel. The glow is caused by ionized air, and the effect becomes stronger when the electric field is intense. Another explanation is Fata Morgana. This is a complex mirage that forms when layers of warm and cold air bends light near the horizon. It can stretch, compress, or invert distant objects. Boats, islands, and coastlines can appear distorted or even multiplied. Under the right conditions, a fata morgana can make distant light look like a ship rising out of the water or breaking apart. The image can shift quickly as the air changes. So both St. Elmo's fire and fata morgana have been documented along the Atlantic coast. They can create shapes that look like ships, flames, or glowing structures. They can also vanish suddenly when the air shifts. These conditions are common in both the Northumberland Strait and the Baie de Chaleurs, especially before storms, which is when these sightings typically are noted to happen. The coastlines change, the names change, and the centuries change, but the stories stay threaded through these waters. A burning ship on the strait, a burning ship in the bay. Two places far enough apart to have their own histories, but close enough that the same kind of light can unsettle people in the same way. Most of the witnesses never tried to make sense of what they saw. They just described it as best they could and carried it with them. A glow on the horizon, a shape that shouldn't have been there, a moment that didn't fit into anything they understood. Some of them spoke about it once and never again. Others held on to it for years before telling anyone. And that's the part that hangs with you. Not the theories or the arguments or the names attached to the stories. It's the people who stood there in the dark, looking at something they couldn't explain, knowing it would stay with them long after the light was gone. Along these shores, that's enough. A single moment out on the water, a flash of something that shouldn't exist, a memory that settles in and refuses to leave. And the rest is whatever the night decides to give you. Thanks for joining me on this eerie journey through Canada's darker corners. If you love this episode of Canadian Creepies, be sure to follow Val on Instagram and TikTok at Radio Valerie, and on Instagram at Canadian Creepies. She's the one behind the socials, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, creepy photos, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more haunted history and twisted folklore, check out my other podcast, Down the Crooked Path. You can follow that show on Instagram and TikTok as well for more haunted history, mythical madness, and spine-tingling storytelling. Come say hi, share your own creepy encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay creepy.